Hey guys. So today we are going to discuss the growing conflict over sexualism, which impacted Andrew Jackson's presidency, an event that we refer to as the Nullification crisis. Now, in order for us to understand this event, we have to understand sexualism itself, as well as the idea of states' rights. So let's get going on this. All right, so I want to begin by talking about what is sectionalism. Sectionalism is when people put the interests of their local region or section above the interests of their entire country. And throughout history, sectionalism has created a lot of conflict in which like one region is pitted against another region. Now, we start to see the roots of sectionalism in the United States embedded in the market revolution. And we already talked about in this class how like the forces of nationalism brought America together in the years after the War of 1812. Between 1790 and 1820, new technologies connected the United States in ways that they had never been connected before. And what ends up happening is each region begins to specialize in specific like economic activities. So you've got the South becoming more reliant on cotton, but unfortunately also becoming also more reliant on slave labor to grow and harvest that cotton. The North starts to see the introduction of textiles, and then out west you see the like larger amounts of food production. Now these things actually connected these parts of the country together. Like the cotton that was being grown in the South fueled the textiles that were being manufactured in the North, and so these two parts of the United States are linked. But because they're specializing in one thing or another, they also start to see their economic needs differently, and they want different things out of their government. So, like for example, the South wants the government to protect like cotton production. They want the government to protect slavery, whereas the North wants the government to protect their manufacturing, and the West wants better transportation that will allow them to get their food to market. And so each region, because of their specialization, have different economic needs. And so this is going to lead to sectionalism, which we see play out in a number of events. Probably one of the best examples of this sectionalism is the divide over slavery. And we can see that with the Missouri Compromise. So when Missouri wanted to enter into the United States in 1819, they did so as a slave state. In fact, they were the first state that would enter into the United States from the like newly formed Louisiana Territory outside of the state of Louisiana itself. And so this created a lot of division within America because there was increasing resistance in the North against slavery. A fact that the South kind of took as a direct threat to the cotton production that they were starting to become reliant on. And so there was a standoff in 1820 over whether or not Missouri should enter into the Union as a free or slave state. Ultimately, Henry Clay alleviated the tension by proposing and helping pass the Missouri Compromise. So the Missouri Compromise entered Missouri as a slave state, and in exchange, Maine was entered in as a free state. Now, what that did was it maintained a political balance between free and slave states, 12 free states, 12 slave states, therefore making sure that each side felt like they were being politically treated fairly. But it also, in a great example of sectionalism, literally drew a line across the United States. That became known as the Missouri Compromise line here at 3630, and that line separated where slavery would be allowed in the future and where it wouldn't. Anything north of this line was supposed to be free, and anything south of this line would allow for slavery. So that kind of puts off the slavery debate, but we can see that these sectional tensions are building during this time period. We see it in other areas as well. So the way that our government would handle the development of the economy also led to tensions. So the American system, which was also proposed by Henry Clay, was a system to try to revitalize and kind of help the national economy grow. And so some of the elements of the American system included rechartering the Bank of the United States, which is how we see the formation of the Second Bank of the United States, protective tariffs that would protect northern manufacturing, and then internal improvements, which was the development of roads and canals, especially out west to link the West with the rest of the United States. Now, this also faced sectional tensions because not all parts of the country agreed to these types of laws or plans by the federal government. At this time period, internal improvements were probably the most controversial because especially southern states didn't feel like it was necessary that their tax dollars go to pay for a road that they would never even use, and that might not even be within their state. And so not all parts of the American system were passed because of ideas of sectionalism and differences in what each region of the country wanted economically. Now, that takes us to the next idea, which is states' rights. And states' rights also is going to contribute to tensions that build up towards the nullification crisis during Andrew Jackson's presidency. So the idea of states' rights, it involves this question of who is more powerful, the federal government or the state government. And there's long been a debate over where power should lie. And we can trace this all the way back to right after the Constitution was created. When the Alien and Sedition Acts were passed in 1796, there was a number of people who thought that was the federal government going too far. The Democratic Republicans at the time, led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, went as far as to say that states could nullify federal laws. And they made that argument in what became known as the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions in 1798. So this is an idea of nullification, that states have rights and that states should be more powerful than the federal government. That argument is going to play out throughout early American history. And we see a number of people using this argument that states can nullify laws. The Federalists used the same argument when they were opposing the Embargo Act in 1807. So these ideas of states' rights and sectionalism come to a head during Andrew Jackson's presidency. Now, Andrew Jackson himself was a firm believer in states' rights. We see him favoring states' rights in a number of issues. It's one of the reasons why he was concerned about the Second Bank of the United States. It also was one of the reasons why he sided with Georgia over the Cherokee Indians in the Indian Removal Act, and the later Worcester v. Georgia case. So he's definitely a supporter of states' rights, but he never favored disunion. But that isn't the case for everyone during this time period. So in 1828, what ends up happening is there's a new tariff that's passed. Now, tariffs were supposed to basically tax imported goods to make them more expensive so that people would be forced to buy American goods. And this was something that favored northern states. Northern states loved tariffs. And the southern states, on the other hand, who didn't manufacture anything, hated them. They saw it as a one-sided law that only really benefited the North and maybe mid-Atlantic states like Pennsylvania and New York. And they felt like it was actually hurting their economy because their cotton never got any kind of similar protections. Not only that, but they favored the growing power of the central government. If the central government could, increasingly tax and regulate the economy, what was to stop them from ending slavery? And so we see a growing outcry against this tariff, especially in the South and especially in South Carolina after 1828. Now, one of the leading figures who led this outcry against the tariff was John C. Calhoun, who was vice president under Andrew Jackson. And John C. Calhoun actually started his career as a war hawk, as a nationalist. But over time, he began to become an increasingly large supporter of not only sectionalism, but also of states' rights. And he argued that the state of South Carolina should have the right to nullify the tariff of 1828 and later tariffs that were passed by the federal government. The South Carolina got behind this idea. In fact, there is a lot of nullifiers in South Carolina, so much so that the people of South Carolina started actually knitting these palmetto cockades, which you see here, and wearing them as a symbol of states' rights and state resistance to the tariff abominations. So what ends up happening is it creates a standoff between Andrew Jackson and the state of South Carolina, which becomes known as the Nullification crisis. So the state of South Carolina actually holds a convention and declares that they're going to nullify the protective tariffs, which they see as unfair. There is even potential talk of secession at this point, that maybe they would leave the United States as a whole. This pits Andrew Jackson, who's president, against South Carolina. And like I said, Andrew Jackson supported states' rights, but not to the point where it could break the United States apart. And so what Andrew Jackson begins to do is he begins to speak out against the nullifiers, and he even begins to raise an army in order to potentially use against like South Carolina, who's talking about nullification. Now, what ends up avoiding this, I guess, bringing this crisis to an end is Henry Clay, who steps in and creates the Compromise Bill of 1833. And essentially what it does is it lowers the protective tariff and to a point where the South feels it's a little bit more reasonable, while at the same time giving Northern manufacturers some protection against foreign goods. And at the same time, the government also passes something called a force bill, which would authorize the president to use force against a state that was in defiance of the federal government. But what we see here, and the reason why this is so important, is that we see sectionalism and states' rights coming to a head, creating conflict over this issue of tariffs. And it got so bad that at this point they're actually talking about, is this a crisis that could lead to a civil war? At this juncture, it does not, but it kind of sets the stage for growing tensions. And what ends up happening is as the debate shifts away from tariffs to the debate over slavery, it will become even harder to resolve these issues. And this is going to kind of foreshadow the oncoming of the Civil War.